Volume 9 Chapter 2 shows me a lot of promise, but the way certain things are done again just irk me a bit. I think there's a solid foundation to this volume in what it's going for, but the execution leaves something wanting. I certainly found this episode more interesting than the first, but I can still summarize it as Blake explains a book, they go to an auction, start shit, leave and get invited to a birthday party. But let's talk about that first bit. I really don't like Blake's big expository dialogue. This sort of, the character explains that they're in a story that they read and elaborates on the whole narrative. It's normally something I only ever see at the start of a narrative and not at the start of the 9th part of a story continuing on from 8 previous parts. It just feels kind of, lazy. Like, this story of the girl who fell through the world was something we only heard about briefly in Volume 8, and it was mentioned in an episode of RWBY Chibi, I think. That's what confirmed the character's name was Alex. This story wasn't even an episode of Fairy Tales, or the part of the Fairy Tales of Remnant book, which would have been sick if it was, because that would have been some cool brand synergy. I don't know, I just felt like Blake explaining it all was kind of just a lazy way to write it. I mean, it makes sense, I get it. I just feel like maybe more should have been... Just realized that the Ever After is just like the back rooms. It fell through the world. So we're just in the RWBY back rooms. Also, I don't really like the immediate assumption that they're in a fairy tale world, that the concept of alternate dimensions or other universes just not exist in RWBY, because my immediate assumption would be I'm on another planet or in another universe, and I think most people would also assume that. It'd be more sensible if Blake had come to the conclusion that they're in a fairy tale world after putting all the pieces together. They'd probably give more reason to have Blake exposit so much too. But that's a minor gripe, it's one scene that is not that important. Let's talk about the scenes where the problems are more substantial. Primarily, the RWBY Depression arc. Frankly, I don't care about this arc. It's been 8 volumes of barely any characterization for RWBY and her being one of the most boring protagonists of all time. Waiting that long is just not it, Chief. However, let's talk about how they tackled it. First of all, RWBY having minimal lines and only saying what she thinks is necessary? Great, that's good. That's a good way to convey it when she's normally so talkative. It's not necessarily subtle, but it doesn't need to be subtle in this case. Having RWBY also joining in with the cartoony over-animated shenanigans? No. Don't do that. I still don't like the over-animated under-animation, if I could call it anything. It's too goofy for me. It isn't funny in the slightest, it's predictable, it takes away from a trait that was most exclusive to Nora and gave her so much personality, and I feel like there was a point in this episode where I physically cringed. I don't remember what it was at, but I remember that feeling. It's just weird, because the quick, sudden shifting movement motion is normally associated with Nora's bubbly happiness, and it's also being applied to a depressed RWBY, which you see the problem there. There's also an issue with subtlety in 2 scenes, well mostly one, where it's a subtlety problem, with RWBY's depression arc. The whole, you need enough hope to fill this jar thing was a fine concept, but I don't need Papa San from Dick Figures literally spelling out, you don't have enough, which is just one step away from, looks like you have no hope left. Like you're a fucking idiot. You know what would have worked? RWBY being a little bit surprised when he says it, she looks a bit unsure of herself, the jar does begin to fill up a little bit, and the crowds are like, ooh, and then it stops at a point and starts going down. Jinxie doesn't say anything, but he looks at the jar curiously, and then Little can come in and steal the thing before anything is said about the situation. That would have hit a lot more home than just, hey, you don't have any hope at all, wow, just in case you didn't notice, viewer. Now let's talk about RWBY pawning off the last thing she has of Penny. Her doing this? Awesome. It's a great way to show that through this, she's still RWBY. She is willing to make sacrifices for others, and she is willing to give up the last piece of Penny she has for the sake of making things better. Penny wouldn't want her to give up, and seeing this weapon, while heartbreaking for her, also gave her a little bit more motivation to keep going and act. This is the only proactive thing RWBY does in the episode for the cause of getting everyone out of there, and it's directly connected to the reminder of Penny. That's cool, and she doesn't need to get up and explain, seeing this weapon made me motivated to do something. What I don't like is the sudden cut to over-the-top cartoony crying as if they're trying to say, what? Well, that was an emotional scene, be sad, but here's a funny moment too. It's not funny. This took a lot away from what was actually a really good scene. I still think it's a decent scene. I also don't really care about these guys, and I don't dislike them. I find their voices to actually be pretty good and charismatic, which is no surprise given one of them is actually nervous fucking Nick. I kind of like their designs. I don't know what it is about them. They look like K2SO, but if he was made in Transformers Cyberverse, and their faces have that expressiveness, despite being so simple. I kind of like that. But I would have liked more if instead of crying about RWBY's story, they actually showed a bit of maturity for a brief time before jumping back into being goofy. It would have added more character and heart to the scene to me. And honestly, that's all I have to say. Oh, right, the Bumblebee thing. I don't care. And honestly, that's all I have to say. I'll see what comes next episode, we'll see what this shit is and where the hell Neo and John are. At this rate, I'm just hoping they don't have some stupid reveal like Neo is actually Alex and John is actually the Rusted Knight, because both of those would be stupid. If John was the tree, however, referencing him being pinned to a tree by Pyrrha, that would be a galaxy brain bit of foreshadowing, not even gonna lie, my dudes.